Since there's a new Zelda game out and it's caused the series to be on my mind, it's time to talk about a game in the series that I already have because I can't afford to buy a $70 game. That game being Twilight Princess, which I think might be the least liked Zelda game.
How about a kiss for luck?
You've got to be kidding.
Good point. Okay, Twilight Princess might be the least liked canon Zelda game. I go online and see people saying it's their favorite game of all time. It's got a 4.9 out of 5 ranking on Google, and IGN even said it was better than Ocarina of Time, which is a game that's constantly up there in the GOAT conversation. So why don't we hear about it more? Is it because it was released on the Wii and nobody really goes back to play that anymore because motion controls are kind of gimmicky? Maybe, but you could also play it on the Wii U and the Cube too. So there are other ways of playing it. Are people just fatigued with this style of Zelda game? Maybe. This was the second to last main console Zelda game before Breath of the Wild, which as we all know pivoted the series in a completely new direction. Maybe it's just because people don't want to admit they actually like the dog part, because then they'd have to explain how that doesn't necessarily make them a furry. Well, whatever the reason is, I decided this game's been sitting on my shelf long enough, and I want to see if Twilight Princess deserves to be talked about more, or if it's forgotten for a good reason. Oh yeah, before I get into this video, I do want to add I'm playing the GameCube version. Most people consider the Wii and Wii U versions to be the optimal ones, but I can only get my hands on the GameCube one, so keep that in mind when I say stuff about the combat and all that stuff. Okay, moving on. Okay, so we can't talk about Twilight Princess without talking about Wind Waker. Basically, the Cliff Notes version of what happened is a lot of people were upset because it was too cartoony and childish looking for them, and they wanted a gritty, grown-up Zelda game for big boys. With hindsight on our side, it's obvious this was a really stupid reaction because Wind Waker is one of the best and most original Zelda games ever made, but that doesn't change how people reacted back then. So with Twilight Princess, because Nintendo took that personally, we get basically the same Link as Ocarina, coming from a very similar background, and being thrust into an adventure to save the world using basically the same gameplay as before, but with some slight changes to distract you. And now I can hear you saying, it's a Zelda game, they're all like that up until Breath of the Wild, but that's actually not as true as you'd think. While Zelda games have always been about Link realizing he's the chosen one, and needing to save Zelda and defeat Ganon, before Twilight Princess, they were actually different enough visually and gameplay wise that they stood on their own. Immediately with Zelda 2, the game changed drastically from the first one, having side-scrolling combat in addition to the top-down style exploration of the first. Then when A Link to the Past came out, they went back to that top-down combat, but the story was much more in-depth and involved than anything before it. Plus all the new items had a big effect on gameplay. Then Ocarina comes out and completely changes the way the game plays from top-down 2D style into the third dimension. Then after that with Wind Waker, the story, world, and art style were completely different, taking it from your typical fantasy setting to basically a pirate one. But unfortunately, because of the reaction to that game's visuals, Nintendo decided to do something no game developer should ever do. They chose to play it as safe as possible and pass off a graphical update to the same gameplay as a new game. To those who love the game, I know it's not that simple, and there's a lot of things that this game does that set it apart from Ocarina, but I mean, let's be honest with ourselves here. Besides the parts where you're a dog, what parts of this game's gameplay aren't just basically copied or slightly improved upon from Ocarina? And that wasn't a rhetorical question either. What are some actual meaningful differences? I genuinely can't think of any, and that's kind of the problem. Alright, I can hear you screaming at the monitor already. Yes, this game also came out on the Wii, and I believe it was the first one with motion controls. My counterpoint to that would be, if you want to play a Zelda with motion controls, the ones in Skyward Sword are much more intuitive and advanced than the ones in this game. And if you're going to play this game in 2023, you're probably just going to be playing it with a controller. I'm sure there is a large group that prefers the motion controls, but the rest of us are fine leaving those in the early 2010s. Not you, Wii Sports, you can stay.
Nice!
And now, before you send Anthrax to my house, I want to say I do actually really like this game, and I've enjoyed the time I've spent with it this past month or so. I don't want this to come across like I'm bashing the game, and I feel like sometimes in my attempts to be humorous with my criticisms, it can come across as more negative than I intend it to be. But I just think it's important to call a spade, and admit this game wasn't exactly breaking new ground when it came out gameplay-wise. But, like the newest entry in this franchise has taught us, there are worse things than being a clone of a good game.
I guess that's worth a kiss, huh?
Ha!
I won!
Much worse things. So I think that's enough dragging this game for not being original, and let's talk about why it is special. So I personally like this game's story a lot. There are only so many ways you can tell the kid from a small town saves the world story, but I like the way they were able to set it up like it was going to be a normal story of leaving the village to go off on an adventure, and then out of nowhere, oh no, there's some goblins riding a giant pig, and they shot my lady friend. Well, I guess now it's time for Link to... Before you even had a chance to have your Bilbo leaving the Shire moment, you got cracked over the head, now you're a dog, you're already in Hyrule Castle, and you meet Zelda all like an hour and a half into the game. They don't waste any time trying to do the Sheik thing again, and just tell you straight up, you're the guy, you gotta do this stuff to help the princess and save the world. Also, you can turn into a dog now. time to get to work. So the main gist of what happens is, there's a bad guy, he's covered the world in darkness, and now you have to go around to the various areas of Hyrule and free them from the darkness and save the world. You also have the personal motivation of saving your friends from your hometown, who've all been captured and spread around into different areas of the darkness. I feel like this was a good choice because it makes where Link came from actually feel important to the story. And some of the other games in this series, it always felt like a rush to get through the tutorial because you don't really care about any of these people, and they aren't going to be important to the story. Maybe I'm just biased, but I actually don't mind this game's tutorial because it made me grow attached to these characters in this little town. I've heard people complain that this game's tutorial takes too long, but for me, Zelda games have always been about the story, so spending some time establishing why I should care about Link's friends was a good thing for me. This also might be my favorite version of Link's hometown in all of the Zelda games, because it just seems so happy. Everyone works together and has their own little purpose in this town, and it all just feels really great. Except this lady who takes the milk from the goats you spend all day herding, and then has the audacity to charge you for it. The revolution will not spare you. This game's Link is also pretty unique in my opinion. I mean, as unique as you can make a character that's basically supposed to be a self-insert. In pretty much every other Zelda game, Link's had this sort of childlike or at the most teenage feeling to him. But in this game, maybe it's just my own interpretation, but Link kind of feels like he could be in his early 20s. He has a dead-end job with an incompetent boss, he has some dumb kids he has to take care of when they get in trouble, and he just seems like he's over the bullshit. Not to mention this is the most jacked Link has ever been. I mean, goddamn, look at those traps. And this did actually have an effect on my experience, because I found myself relating a lot to this version of Link, the way I did with the others when I was a kid. Longing for independence and adventure. Now Link has responsibilities, and the story is more about doing the right thing to help the people around him. It made me want to see him succeed because it felt personally inspiring to me that someone in his position could break through and become a hero. And with this more grown-up version of Link, Nintendo was able to craft a story around him that was much more serious and dark than usual. Like the ghost of the Zora Queen literally tells you she got murdered in front of her people. The Gorons have reverted to racism out of fear. Your sword teacher is a dead guy who, depending on who you ask, could be the Link from Ocarina of Time. It just seems like this version of Hyrule is really at its breaking point, and if you care at all about any of the people living in it, it's pretty scary. Hyrule itself in this game is very similar to Ocarina, in the sense that there's the different zones with the different races that live in them. Gorons in Death Mountain, Zora in the lake, and the Hylians pretty much just everywhere because they aren't fish or giant rock creatures. Plus the layout's very similar besides it being bigger, but what is different is when you enter the areas when they're still shrouded in darkness. When you enter a new area for the first time, you have to go through it once as a dog to collect these tears from these little bug things that you can then use to help save the god thing of that area and return it to the light. Sounds kind of convoluted, but it makes sense if you play the game. Now there are some people out there who don't like the dog segments. I can see where they're coming from. If they really just wanted to play as Link on an adventure, and then these segments just felt like a barrier between them and that. But personally, I never had a problem with them. They don't last super long. The combat is fine aside from the fact you have to wait for enemies to stand up before you can hit them again, which can be kind of annoying. And I thought they did a pretty good job of designing the areas to have cool ways to get into buildings when you're a dog, besides just opening doors because dogs don't have any thumbs. Suck it, dogs. And I also didn't really know where else to talk about this in the video, but I really like how connected to nature this game is. It's normal in these games to have animal friends who tell you where to go and stuff like that, but I really like that, like, for example, instead of just having the ocarina that you can play song into and make stuff happen, there are these little pieces of grass that you can use to play songs, to call birds or your horse, and stuff like that. And then as a dog, you can howl to make that stuff happen. The gods of these areas are even just these big animals. It really seemed like to me they wanted to make a point that nature and that the earth are the good guys in this game, and that the bad guys were abusing and destroying nature to benefit themselves in the short term. Definitely not a metaphor for anything in the real world. I really love Midna. To me, she's by far the best hint/helper person in these games. Navi is super annoying and never leaves you alone, which always got on my nerves. It was to teach people who are still new to 3D games though, so I can sort of give it a pass for that, but I simply cannot be as generous with Fi. They had a perfect example of a great companion helper character thing with Midna, with how non-invasive she is and the fact that she's an actual person with goals and motivations of her own, then went back to an annoying Navi-like helper. No excuse, Nintendo. Jail. But yeah, like I said, I love that Midna's like an actual character, and how sassy she is. She always gives tutorials a little extra flavor because she makes it funny with the way she tells you stuff. You can also ignore her a lot of the time if you don't need help, and there were even a few times I had to call her up and be like, what was I supposed to be doing again? And I just really like that she's a real character. Plus, I mean, it doesn't hurt that she turns into a hot goth chick at the end.
Oh, she's so cute. Oh, dude, don't even get me started.
Spoilers, I guess, sorry. So I have a confession to make about Zelda puzzles. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I've always been really bad at figuring out what they want me to do for some reason. Like, For example, very early in the game, you're supposed to go into this guy's house and steal his sword while you're in dog form. Seems simple enough, but as a dog you can't open doors. Again, suck it dogs. So what you're supposed to do is use your special dog senses and notice that some of the dirt is sparkling, which means you can dig in it. And I'm sure this seems really obvious to people who have already played the game, as the digging thing becomes a pretty big part of the game, but it took me a really long time to figure this out until I talked to this helpful chicken. So you can probably guess how the rest of this game's dungeons went for someone who got stumped by that puzzle. Like, no joke, it took me 2 hours to finish the water temple, and I was using a guide. Now I was having some technical difficulties, but I was still struggling even without my controller disconnecting. Now while I may have took embarrassingly long to do some of the puzzles, okay, a lot of the puzzles, I think this game's dungeons are really good. The dungeons have never actually been my favorite part of the 3D Zelda games for obvious reasons, but I found this game's dungeons to be enjoyable enough that I didn't mind the backtracking if I missed something, and felt satisfied using my new abilities on the boss. For example, I really liked the dungeon with the little monkeys. I thought they were really cute, and I liked that that big butt monkey started as a bad guy and then helped with the big boss at the end. The one where you get the spinny thing is also really cool. I like the part where you had to use your dog senses to find the lantern enemies by following their scent. Something this game's dungeons have that are also problems with the other 3D Zelda games though, is they kind of make it so the first experience with the game is always going to be fun, but any playthroughs after the first one get sort of tedious when you try to rush through the dungeons already knowing what you're supposed to do. And while yes, this is also true for most games where your first experience playing the game is going to be the best one as you discover things, but I think when so much of these dungeons is having that aha moment, when you're no longer having that, you're much less willing to put up with stuff like this. Also, was it really necessary to make climbing this slow? Maybe I'm spoiled from Breath of the Wild, but I feel like this is just ridiculous. Alright, now let's talk bosses. Like every Zelda game before it, Twilight Princess bosses are more about using your skills and tools you've acquired through the dungeon to find a solution to the boss's puzzle, more than it is about combat. I've always felt like when I'm playing a Zelda game, I'm looking for a story that tugs at my heartstrings, some puzzles, exploration, and when a bad guy shows up, just mashing the attack button to win. Twilight Princess is no exception, with the boss encounters in this game mostly just requiring puzzle solutions. Normally I would talk about some bosses I like, and what it was like to fight them, but I do kind of want to keep stuff unspoiled in this game, just in case you watch this video and decide to give this game a try. So I'll just say, if you're someone who subbed to me because you like Bloodborne, the bosses might leave something to be desired for you, but if you go in treating the boss more like it's a time-sensitive puzzle, I think you'll have more of a good time with them. Like the other puzzles in the dungeons, you'll find it's more about finding the aha solution, so I still want you to have that experience if it's your first time. For the sake of the review though, I will say that I like them a lot. Most of them at least. There are so many weirdos in this game, and I absolutely love it. First we got the clowns. No Zelda game would be complete without them. And in this game, there's scammers hustling you out of your rupees. We got the underpants mailman who's hilarious every time he shows up. And my personal favorite, the girl who's obsessed with bugs. I love her, she's great. We also have Big Boob Revolutionary Woman.
With her boob coming out.
Very inspiring. The bird with an afro who kills you if you don't pay for his oils. And plenty more. I found myself having a chuckle to myself plenty of times reading some of the things these silly characters in this game say. Minor point I guess, but I just thought it added enough to my experience that I wanted to say something about it. Now there were multiple times while playing this game I had to consult a guide to get around. Not even like that I didn't know what to do next and had to look it up. Like I knew exactly what I needed to do and where I needed to be. I just didn't know how to get there. The game does have warp points that you can use to fast travel, but there are some times before like the midway point of the game where you just can't use them. So you need to know exactly where you're going and how to get there. And if you don't, you can lose a lot of time running around the map, trying to remember where the entrance to the area you're looking for is. A complaint that's kind of similar is the parts where Midna needs you to find something that can be used to get past a particular obstacle. So you either need to remember that an hour ago a piece of rock fell from the sky and figure out that it's going to be the solution to this puzzle, or you could wander around the map endlessly until you figure out what the game needs you to do, or, what you probably actually do, Google what you need to unfreeze the Zora. It's not a huge complaint because this only happens a couple times, But if you're the type of person who's against using guides for help, this could take a really long time to figure out, and it isn't really necessary. Another thing that bugs me though, was how tedious it could be at times to switch between items. I was playing on the GameCube version, so I had one less hotkey, but I still think having a quicker way to switch between them, in a game heavily dependent on using items to solve puzzles, would have been a good thing. So if you're still missing that classic Zelda formula, or you pass this game up because you're sick of the old Zelda formula, maybe give this game another shot. I think it deserves it, and if you go in with an open mind, there's a good chance you'll really like this game. And I promise I'm not just being lazy by leaving a lot of stuff from later in the game out of this video. I just genuinely think this game is worth playing, and if you can get your hands on it, I'd like to leave a lot of the story and puzzles for you to figure out for yourself. Even if you've already played it, it might have been a while and maybe you forgot about the solution to some of the puzzles. Whatever the case, give it a try if you can. Now, a little update before I end this video. I'm going to be using my second channel I made a long time ago to post my Let's Play type content and more unscripted style stuff there. I've done a lot of overthinking on this topic, and when I've thought about it as a viewer, I'd rather have a while between uploads on a channel I subscribe to for a specific type of content, rather than just having a bunch of stuff I don't really care about between all the stuff that I actually do want to see. So if you like my Let's Plays and the stuff I do like that, a link to that channel is going to be in the description. Also, I don't really plan on doing this, but if I were to ever live stream, it would probably be on that channel, not this one. But I don't want to lock myself into that and then not do it, so who knows. Anyway, with all that, I'm going to end this video here. I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully it inspires some of you to give this game a try, because it's better than it gets credit for in my opinion. And sorry this took so long, I got bronchitis and had to spend a couple weeks not having the energy to do anything, so this one's taken way too long. I do want to get these out faster though, so fingers crossed I don't get sick for a while. But anyway, thanks for watching. If you're still here, subscribe, it would mean a lot to me, and don't click any of those links.